Wherever you are, welcome. However you found this moment, I'm glad you did. I'm Dave, and this is Dave's Head, where perspective matters and clarity sets the tone. Let's get into it. What's in my head? First thing, SCOTUS grew a spine, apparently. Supreme Court of the United States, SCOTUS, ruled against this administration on the tariffs that old Trumpy had a little fit and put on the rest of the world. And it was the judicial branch putting and asserting that there are truly limits to executive power. This ruling underscores constitutional tension. And the fact that we have to say that, constitutional tension between executive authority and judicial oversight. You might remember, hopefully you do, maybe you don't, if not, I'll remind you, that the United States of America is built on the basis and foundation that there are three co-equal, say that again, three co-equal branches of government: the judicial, the executive, and the legislative. But this ruling, which just totally pissed off Trump, where he's threatening, or not threatening, he's asserting that he only lost in this ruling because there's foreign intervention with the Supreme Court. Wasn't no foreign intervention before. It's kind of like the election thing. Somehow when he won, there was nothing wrong with the election. But when he lost, suddenly there's election fraud. Go figure. But this forces, again, this national conversation about how far a president can go in economic policymaking without explicit congressional approval. Here's the thing. You own the House. You own the Senate. And by own, I mean you have the majorities. You own the legislative branch. You own the executive branch. You own the judicial branch. And so you would think, since Republicans, and by way of Republicans, Trump has the power of the legislative branch, has the power of the executive branch, and has the power of the judicial branch, that you would just go through the process of getting a law passed to enact these tariffs. That's what doesn't make sense to me. Because if you did that, it seems to me that you would have no problem, even if you're doing this by way of hissy fit, but you would have no problem getting the tariff percentage that you wanted, whatever that tariff percentage is. And so now we find ourselves in this kind of purgatory, right? There's ripple effects to this decision. And the markets, because the markets used to matter and they didn't, and now they do again. But the markets respond not just to policy, but to this legal uncertainty. And add on top of that, there are a number of lawsuits that are starting to fly in. FedEx, I believe, was one that filed a lawsuit to get all their tariff money back the other day. And so all this uncertainty created because one man wants to be a dictator, authoritarian. Me, I get to decide. No one's going to limit my power. And so businesses are now, between the lawsuits, or after, when they're not filing lawsuits, they're trying to recalculate how to run their businesses, how to use the supply chain. Will there be refunds or won't there be refunds? And all this threatens to shift balance sheets in the stock market and all these things that matter. And so with these tariffs being deemed unlawful, refunds of billions with a B, billions of tariffs becomes this legal number one and logistical number two challenge or nightmare. How are you going to refund? And I don't even know the numbers that FedEx is saying. Let's say it's $500 million. How are you refunding that? Where is that actually coming from? Have you already spent the money, right? The tariffs. You supposedly took in all this tariff money. Are you telling me it's gone? Where is this money coming from? And so all this, once again, highlights the importance of following the law, right? Especially when it becomes the financial stuff that impacts people's lives, impacts the markets, impacts policy. Follow the law. Ran your campaign talking about law and order, then it's time to be lawful in your actions, and suddenly you don't understand law anymore. Suddenly you don't understand why the judicial branch asserts its authority based on the Constitution and the law. That doesn't make sense to me. Well, it kind of makes sense to me. You don't really care about the law. You're not really about law and order. You're about what I can do regardless of the law, regardless of order. And finally, although 3 justices, the usual Clarence Thomas and friends, the usual justices dissented, but 3 conservative, 3 progressive or liberal justices, the optics of all this internationally, think about it. We've already lost respect internationally because of this clown show in DC. And I get it. Debate's going to be on partisan lines where you're going to have conservatives or Republicans saying, oh, what the heck is SCOTUS doing? You're going to have progressives or liberals or Democrats saying, finally, law and order, right? We knew all along, right? But the deeper issue is, do we have constitutional guardrails or not? That's what it comes down to. Because if there is no Constitution, there is no quote unquote United States of America. If the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and its amendments are not binding and the basis for how we legally operate in this country, then there is no United States of America. What this reminds us all, or at least me, hopefully it does us all, is that these systems, not personalities, not partisanship, shouldn't be money either. That sustains the republic. Systems. And the system in this case is the Constitution. Now, I've spent almost 10 minutes talking about this. And the one thing I haven't talked about is probably the most important thing along this topic. The consumer. You and I. Because regardless of how tariffs go, and we've already seen this, right? Corporations pass the cost of tariffs on to you and I. Now, one interesting thing about this is, assuming SCOTUS ruling actually has some teeth and tariff refunds happen, 2 things I can promise you are not going to happen. The prices of product are not going to magically go down reciprocal to the decrease in tariffs. They're not. 2 reasons. 1, profit, hello. And the second reason is you're used to these prices. X amount of days has passed since the price went up to this level. You're used to going to a grocery store and paying $20 for some chicken, $15 for some eggs, whatever the amount is. And I know eggs aren't $15, thank goodness. But you're used to these prices. The FedExes of the world aren't going to suddenly go, well, let's lower prices now since we're getting our tariffs back. It's not going to happen. Reversal would bring trust back, right? If you reverse these price increases, based on the tariffs you're now getting back at some point, we're assuming again that tariffs are actually coming back, then you can gain some trust with the consumer, with the people of this nation for your corporation or business. Seems like a simple thing, but the problem is profit over people. Because now you have an opportunity to get all that, and again, our example, $500 million back into your company, keep prices exactly the same, pay less going forward for imports. So now the cost to manufacture or produce or bring in those products now has decreased. And so now your margin has increased. Now you can get more for that product. And you still got your $500 million back. So you can probably throw that in the bank account somewhere and just get interest off of it. And that's probably what they would do, unfortunately. Sucks. Sucks for us. Doesn't suck for them. I mean, they're loving this. I mean, that's just that's just how it works, right? Capitalism works that way. Want more clarity, perspective, and real conversation? Tune in to Dave's Head Podcast. Every episode delivers insight, conversation, and stories that make you think, and maybe even smile a little. Whether YouTube, Spotify, Apple, the Alive Podcast Network, or your preferred source, subscribe, follow, tune in, and share with anyone who needs to hear it. Don't you miss a single episode. Your next great conversation starts in Dave's Head. The last thing that's on my mind is we see this, and I've noticed it over the last couple years, and especially if you go back to Trump 1.0 and even the Obama years. this politicizing of patriotism as a identity mark. You're presented with the options of either your pom-poms, blue, red, white, and blue pom-poms, or you're a traitor to this nation. You're not loyal. Increasingly, patriotism is presented as partisan alignment rather than a shared civic responsibility. And it turns national pride into this loyalty test instead of a unifying principle. And listen, the media amplifies this stuff. You turn on Fox, you turn on MS Now, you turn on CNN, you turn on whatever that ultra conservative one is called that spawned up the last couple of years. From sporting events to weather forecasts, this performative nationalism is more than normalized. It's everyday life right now. And it's the injection of slogans into neutral reporting that blur these lines between information and persuasion, between facts and forced patriotism. And even in the weather. So the Northeast, if you live in the Northeast, you know that there was this cyclone, bomb cyclone, or nor'easter, whatever. It was something. It was like Snowmageddon Part 2 or something, whatever happened the past weekend. And I was watching a weather broadcast, and I'm not going to say which channel it was on. One, because I'm not confident what it was, and two, I don't want to put that network on blast. It's not about that. But, and I actually saw this online as well, but there was this big rah-rah celebration that the U.S. weather model was slightly, and this is not, completely different, but just slightly in area where the storm was going to move, a little bit north, a little bit south, snow totals, that type of stuff, was just a slightly bit more accurate than the Euro model. And the weather forecaster, exalted USA, USA, USA. And it could be just me being hypersensitive over the political and patriotism polarization that's happened over the last decade or so. And maybe all the things that's happened, whether it's the Super Bowl and Bad Bunny. And so, all that being filtered through patriotism and political ideology, that maybe I interpreted that a lot more than it was actually intended. Or maybe it was exactly how it was intended. But there's so much of this politicization of patriotism in our everyday life that you kind of get sick of it. Like, you just want to say, dude, I was born here. Shut up. I'm not going to be singing the praises of this country every day like it's perfect and flawless. Some days I'm going to complain. Some days I'm going to go, you know what? Killing that citizen is fucked up. You know what? Price gouging during a pandemic, that's fucked up. You're not happy in your own home every day. You're going to tell somebody to be happy in their own country every day? That makes no sense. There's a reason freedom of speech exists, because you have the right to address and redress your government. I'm not going to agree with everything happening in this country every day. Nor is your neighbor, nor is your friend, nor is your family, nor is that stranger you've never met in your life. So get over yourself thinking you can push patriotism and force a flag down somebody's throat. It's not how it works. And until people get that through their head, that just because you aren't singing and shaking pom-poms every day and chanting USA while you're sitting on the toilet, doesn't make you less of a patriot than them. In fact, my ability to see the flaws and want them corrected and fixed probably makes me more of a patriot than you, who sits there and accepts everything and thinks it's all shine gold. If you think everything's perfect, more power to your imagination. You need to be in movie writing, script writing, something, because your imagination is powerful. Storytelling, something. And it's not. And it may never be. And every day, every single person in this country has a right to say, you know what? That's fucked up, whether you like it or not. There was a time when, probably before my time, but I hear about it anyway, a time where being American meant living freely according to your values. Even in the civil rights era, even in, Jim Crow, and even in, you go back to the wars, segregation, all that. Even with all that, being American, even if it was in a pocket of America, right? Like the segregated pocket of America, you still live freely in your segregated area. And I know that doesn't make sense to a lot of people, but what I'm saying is, When black people collectively stuck together, they were free in that space until disrupted by racist people or whatever. And despite the bloody history of this country, the bad history that people want to erase or rewrite or whitewash and all that stuff, patriotism was one of those things as we move through time that we could all get around, right? When the Olympics came up, suddenly, you know what? I'm cheering for the sport. I have no idea what the hell it is, but they got my colors on. So I'm cheering for them. And now it's like, if you aren't cheering loud enough, something's wrong with you. That's a problem. But a healthy republic and a healthy people, a healthy citizenry requires the space to be themselves, to like what they want to like and complain or dislike the things they don't. If your only measuring bar for patriotism is that every day you wake up thinking everything's perfect, and if you don't, you're not a patriot, you have a really big problem. And I hope, and I'm not saying this jokingly, I hope at some point you seek help, because perfection isn't patriotism. Recognizing the imperfections, hoping for better, is patriotism. And that's what's in my head. Zolal Habibi is an Iranian human rights activist with more than 25 years of advocacy for political prisoners, women, and democratic reform in Iran. As a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, or NCRI, she amplifies the voices of those seeking freedom and accountability. Her activism was shaped by the loss of her father during the 1988 massacre, fueling a lifelong commitment to justice and democratic change. Hello, Zolal. Welcome to Dave's Head. How's it going?
Good. Hope that you're doing well. Thank you for this opportunity, and please allow me to greet those who are tuning into the podcast. It's a pleasure to be with you.
I'm happy you're here. What I like to do with my guests is allow them to introduce themselves in their own words. So if you could just take a moment, tell everyone who you are, what you do, and what you're about.
Well, as you mentioned, I am an activist with the Iranian resistance and a member of the National Council of Resistance of Iran's Foreign Affairs Committee. I belong to the generation that unfortunately was born after the 1979 revolution, and I haven't had the opportunity to be able to actually live in Iran. I was born and raised abroad as my parents left Iran before the revolution, but I can truly say that there hasn't been a day in my life that I have not thought about the people of Iran and their plight. And it's an issue that's always been close to my heart. And I have dedicated the last 26 years of my life to the cause of freedom in Iran.
And talk about that 26-year journey and how everything started. And I know I spoke about the tragedy of losing your father, but if you want to talk about that.
Well, when I was 7, my father, he was a prominent writer and a human rights activist, and he was killed by the Iranian regime. The reality is that in the summer of 1988, the regime had over 30,000 political prisoners executed in Iran. And that not only made an impact in my life, but in the lives of thousands and thousands of others, millions. And also it just made a major impact in the history of Iran. I became acquainted with the human rights situation in Iran before then, like as a child, because of my parents' work and activities. I remember I was about 4 the first time that I met people who were victims of torture, and seeing them, meeting them, hearing their stories, it really impacted me. But I always thought that that was in Iran, and we're here, so we're safe. But I learned very early on that the regime sees no borders when it comes to keeping its grip on power, be it geography, be it age, gender, none of it. The Iranian regime has executed children as young as 13 years old, elderly mothers, pregnant women. The reason it does that, it wants to send that message to society that I know no borders when it comes to keeping my grip on power. And that is what I think the world has seen in the past 2 months or so in Iran. I mean, the fact that thousands and thousands of people were killed at point blank on the streets of Iran in January, I think sends a clear message. And right now, over 50,000 people who have been detained and are in prisons right now as we speak, who were detained in the protests, and their lives are in limbo. That is
Mm.
aside from the thousands of political prisoners and prisoners on death row right now in Iran. So that is the current circumstances. But I think what's important here is the other side of the coin, and that's the resistance of the Iranian people and their steadfastness in their fight against this regime. And it is reaching a new, I guess, its heights right now.
Mm.
And we are seeing a generation or generations of Iranians who have decided that they want to see change. They will bring about that change. They're not looking on uh, outsiders to be able to help. They want to take their destiny into their own hands and to be the change they want to see in society. Our people have learned the hard way that no one's going to hand you freedom in a silver platter, and
Mm.
foreign intervention never leads to true democracy or peace. So we have that experience in the last 100 years in Iran, and they are looking to move forward um, to a secular democratic republic in Iran,
Mm.
which would be, their message is we're not stuck choosing between the current regime, which is a theocracy, and the previous one, which was a dictatorship, also the monarchy. And they want to move forward, especially the Gen Z of Iran. You hear that message loud and clear from the universities and their activities, but also there are other messages that, the solution to Iran is not war or appeasement. It's to support the Iranian people and their organized resistance to bring about change.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. But I want to step back for a second because I know you mentioned January and I guess February's numbers as well. But even going back to last year, I think the reports are over 2,000 executions just in 2025, and just the escalation of this regime and now the resistance, as you talked about, it's growing and growing and it's transforming. How do you see the resistance combating these executions, combating this regime, and how can it move forward successfully?
As you mentioned, there were over 2,200 executions carried out in 2025. Um, the reason for the increase in execution is that the regime, especially since 2022, feels like it has entered its last chapter. So they knew that another uprising would be inevitable, and that uprising will be in the process, that these uprisings are evolving step by step to reach the overthrow of the regime. The regime knew that this time would be different than previous times, and they have been trying to prepare for that in the last few years. And that's why we see, the death sentences being handed down in the past year and a half in Iran. The political prisoners, the members of resistance units, or people charged with that under those circumstances. And the message that the regime is trying to give is they're trying to spread fear. But what we're seeing as a result is that no one's giving in to that fear, and in fact, it's
Mhm.
growing the culture of resistance. Just if you look in, it's been 2 years now that every Tuesday, um, prisoners are going on hunger strike against the death penalty in Iran. And this is something that started from one prison and from just a few political prisoners, and it's extended now to over 50 prisons across
Mm.
Iran and organized. So you're seeing that organized resistance, that forming, and you see it in the bedrock of Iran society and how it's extending throughout the country. That is one of the things that I think a lot of people who are analyzing the protest this time around, the strikes which began with the strike of the bazaar on December 28th, but immediately within the first 24 hours spread to the universities, and then throughout society, people from all walks of life joined in. So you saw, the span of different generations coming together, different, people from different backgrounds, but all of Iran, all 31 provinces joined in the uprisings. And I think one of the things that a lot of those who were analyzing the scenes were touching on was the fact that you see organized structure among the protesters. You see that there are teams who are organizing people on the ground, who are telling them, what to do, what direction to go, like how to continue. And that is phenomenal, I think. And that is the game changer. And that is the role of resistance units throughout Iran. And also, one of the things that we heard from the, messages, calls coming from Iran is like, despite the brutalities, despite all the deaths and the killings, one of the things that stood out is they said, we see hope in people's eyes, something that we haven't seen in a long time. And that defiance also shines through if you look at the videos and images that have been coming out in the last week, because in Persian culture, we have this thing that they honor those who've been killed on like 3 days after their death, 7, and then 40 days. Last week marked the 40 days for most of those who have been killed in the protest, and we have been seeing their ceremonies and the vigils being held, and how they are turning to a form of resistance, how these families are not giving in into sorrow. In fact, they are saying we will continue the path of our children, the path of our loved ones, and that they're, celebrating the lives that they had, the fact that they lived with a purpose, they dedicated their lives to, they gave their lives for freedom in Iran, and they want to make sure that those lives are not lost in vain. So everyone is making that pledge that we're going to continue. And we've been seeing it in the universities in Iran in the past few days. But also in the, the defiance of the youth and the rebellious youth throughout Iran in recent days with their activities, and how they are really trying to take, as I said, their destiny into their own hands. We saw in the protests how they were able to disarm suppressive forces. They were able to organize, regroup, push forward. And I think that is exactly what the regime fears, because the Iranian regime knows at the end of the day, it will be overthrown by the people of Iran. Because, if you understand Iran's geography, the geopolitics of the region, our history, you would know that, foreign intervention is not going to bring about that democracy or that change, regime change. So it has to be done by the people, and that's why the regime fears the current status quo so much, and that's why they're resorting to suppression at this level. It's not a sign of strength, it's a sign of its weakness that it has to resort to such brutalities.
Yeah, I got two quick follow-ups before I get to my question. I want to talk about foreign intervention in a second, but two things struck. One, hope. And you mentioned hope being seen in those who were starting to resist or are already participating in resistance. One thing I forget who said it, but hope strikes fear in the heart of the oppressor. And so, just to go from hopelessness to hopeful and to put the efforts together is commendable. And I'm a huge proponent and fan of hoping that comes to fruition where I think you said Democratic Republic would be the result, or secular republic. Second thing, real quick, not to make light of the conversation, but December 28th, you mentioned something started. And I'm happy to see, that's my birthday, happy to see something positive around the world happening on my birthday. But to get to the foreign intervention and to tie this, I mean, we've got an administration here in the United States that a large swath of people are not exactly happy with. And we know there has been recent threats from this administration towards Iran, which is in the area, general vicinity. And speaking of foreign intervention or even foreign interference, do you think that there's a possibility that if the United States does something in that area, it could destabilize not just the area, but your efforts as well?
Yeah, I think that the reality is, first of all, I know there's a lot of rhetoric, but I really don't think that the US is going to act on it. Um,
I don't either.
because right now there's so many different things on the table of, I think, in the US administration that they, this is maybe like a smokescreen too. But
Mm,
aside from that, I mean, the reality is that if you look at it even just from a military perspective, a scenario like Venezuela is not likely because they like you remove Khamenei, that system is still, you know, there.
mm,
When Khomeini died, well, Khamenei was brought into place. When if Khomeini is removed, dies, whatever, they're going to replace him with someone. So that system is still intact. So that's not going to bring about change. If you mean like change, like troops on the ground, well, Iran is 3 times the size of Iraq, 4 times the population. Uh, if you look at the terrain, I mean, no matter from which side you decide to come into Iran, um, to be able to reach Tehran, you have to go through, mountains, desert,
mm.
forest, you name it, we have it. So it's
Yeah.
not something that's very practical. And I think that especially when it's a foreign enemy, I mean, foreign entity, the Iranian people don't look at the US as an enemy or any other country as an enemy. The enemy is the regime itself. But I mean, any kind of foreign intervention, it's not something that people want in their country, especially with our history. So it's not very likely to be able to carry something like that out. Um, just look at the experience from the 8-year Iran-Iraq war. Um, and the reality is that the regime will use that to suppress the people even more extensively and, try to, I guess, the people of Iran aren't going to rally under the flag, but you get, the concept in general.
Yeah. Hmm.
But also, we have this history of like what foreign intervention does, not only from what we've seen in other countries, but in our own country. I mean, Reza Khan was brought in by the British and then through a military coup. And then when he wasn't serving those purposes anymore, they took him into exile and they replaced him with his son. Um, at that time, his son did not have the power that his father did, so he had to give in to some reforms. And so, we had, um, for once, a democratic elected prime minister, and that was Dr. Mossadegh. And he nationalized Iran's oil, which was not something that the West wanted to see. So there was a coup d'etat carried out by the CIA and MI6 against Dr. Mossadegh, and he was taken out and the Shah was reinstated. And from that moment on, you know, the country and the Shah just, understood that he has to keep his grip on power. So what did he do? We see, the Savak, and its tortures and executions and everything that the crackdown that it did. And we saw that, all forms of activity, political, social activity, forbidden in Iran. Iran becomes a one-party state, and the Shah gives a statement that, you know, the only party is Rastakhi's. If you don't like it, leave the country, or you'll be imprisoned. And that is how he ruled.
Mm,
And at that time, the reality is the people of Iran pushed and created that revolution. The story is extensive, so I'm not going to get into it because we're not talking about the past so much. But the people of
mhm,
Iran revolted against the Shah and they overthrew the Shah and the monarchy. Unfortunately, their revolution was hijacked because the revolutionaries, or those revolutionary forces, were still in prison when the Shah was overthrown. And 6 months before, when everyone realized that the Shah is on the verge of falling apart, like we are in the state that we are in today with the regime, well, the Western governments, Khomeini was brought in from exile in Najaf to Paris, and they held negotiations with him in Guadeloupe. And at the time, it was the Cold War era, and Western powers decided that maybe it's a safer bet to go with Khomeini, who is, clergy fundamentalist, than have the true revolutionary forces, which were progressive movements, come into power in Iran. And the people of Iran have been paying that price now for 47 years. So we
Mhm.
have that experience of
So
foreign intervention. We don't want it.
yeah, yeah. I was going to say that the last thing you need, it sounds like, is Western, especially Western intervention or interference in anything that's happening. Um, I do want to something you mentioned during that last answer that I want to touch on for a second. I was going to talk about misconceptions, but you mentioned that the Iranian people do not dislike or do not hate the United States. And can you talk about the misconception of that in the U.S. that Iran, Iraq, the Middle East, whatever however you want to characterize it as one big place or the smaller individual countries, that there's this innate either fear or belief that there is hatred from that area towards United States.
Well, the Iranian people, they truly don't hate any other country, because especially after, in these past 47 years, they have seen what the regime is doing. And so they all feel that no one has perpetrated more crimes against our own people than this regime. So, and they also know that the regime feeds on this issue. I mean,
Mhm.
just look, every Friday prayer, it's, death to America, death to the UK, death to this, death to that, death to the MEK, death to, people aren't standing for that. And that's not what they want. We also see the fact that, unfortunately, Iran is the number one state sponsor of international terrorism. And so we've seen the effect of Iran's warmongering and terrorism in the international community and in the world. And that's not what Iranians want. They want to be able to live in coexistence with all the other countries in in the Middle East, and be at peace with the world, and to be able to, have amicable relationships with, all governments and countries. But they are opposed to foreign intervention. They have that wound still, yeah, because the only democratic government that we had was overthrown by coup d'etat, and everything that came after that. So, I mean, the Iranian people, they're okay with every country, and they're very hospitable. They're known for their hospitality, for their culture of hospitality, and for, having that connection to their international community, and being, very, I guess, showing sympathy and uh, being sympathetic to the pains of other people. But as I said, um, they're like, you know what? At the end of the day, what we're suffering from is our own regime. And unfortunately, that is the circumstances that we have. So the people of Iran really don't have a problem with any government. They don't want intervention from any government in their country, but they have nothing against, a given government. They would like to just see peace and stability in their own country for once.
Yeah. We have a saying over here, just mind your business, right? Just let us handle our problems and resolve our problems, and don't interfere, don't interject, don't CIA us or anything like that. Um,
Yeah.
so
That's what,
yeah,
yeah, the president-elect of the Iranian resistance, Ms. Maryam Rajavi, actually, like 20 years ago, not just today, she was speaking at the European Parliament, and that's where she presented this case. And she said, look, the people of Iran, they say the solution is neither war nor appeasement. It's supporting the Iranian people in their resistance. But you have to understand that neither war reaches a democracy, nor does appeasement lead to democracy. In fact, appeasement leads to war. And unfortunately, the people who have been used as bargaining chips at the table of appeasement negotiations have been the Iranian people. So we've bared that price. So what we're asking for is a firm policy on Iran. That doesn't mean troops on the ground. It just means firm policy, and it has there are clear signs of that. Unfortunately, we have learned to read between the lines. Like for instance, when uprising happens to Iran, and this is like the fourth uprising we've had in the last 10 years in Iran, you hear messages of condemnation, beautifully worded at times. But on the other hand, you see the actions that are taken. Like for instance, just even in this recent uprising afterwards, we saw that at the time that there was the internet blackout, there was also the World Economic Forum was being held in Davos, and they actually extended an invitation to Iran's foreign minister at a time that people were still in the internet blackout. The world knew that the atrocity that had happened and massacre had taken place in Iran, but despite that, they were willing to extend that invitation. So what is the message to the people of Iran and to the Iranian regime? To the Iranian regime, it's a green light that, if you're able to keep yourself afloat through massacre, it's fine. We'll accept you at the table again. And to the Iranian people, is like, yeah, we say we stand by you, but we actually prefer, continuing our negotiations with this regime till the last minute. The only reason they actually canceled his presence was because of the outrage from the Iranian diaspora, and that was like 2 hours before his arrival. And just this week, just yesterday, this representative of the Iranian regime spoke at the UN Human Rights Council. What does that mean? Why would you give the platform,
an audience?
to in the UN Human Rights Commission, to
Of all things,
yeah, exactly. And so that is unfortunate what we've seen. And also, like for instance, when you look, there was a 19-day internet blackout in Iran. The international community could have provided communication to the people of Iran if they wanted to, but they didn't. So that's the things that we are talking about. Like when we say hold the regime accountable, well, war crimes have taken place and crimes against humanity just in 2026 in Iran. Where is the outrage? Where is the regime being held accountable? Nowhere. So that is the issue that we have.
Yeah, the selective blind eye, right? It comes down to me, it seems like, and I'm not a geopolitical expert by any means, but to me, it seems like the root of all evil starts with money, right? So how can this nation or that nation or this nation, the U.S., benefit financially from either injecting ourselves or not injecting ourselves into situations, regardless of human rights violations, war crimes, all those things? And that's a big problem, right? It should be a human level, not a financial or monetary level.
Yeah.
But that's where we are.
Even right now, when they're speaking about negotiations with Iran, which are ongoing, the issue at the table is not the human rights situation in Iran. It's Iran's nuclear program. So it's not like, the fact that you've killed thousands of people on the streets, or, over 50,000 people are currently in prison, who were detained in these protests. It's, about Iran's nuclear program. So unfortunately, it doesn't have its place at the table. And that's why it's really important to understand the role of the Iranian resistance in being the voice of the people of Iran and echoing that voice and keeping that issue on the table throughout all these years.
Gotcha. So last question during this segment. I want to talk about you and women and their role and how they've emerged as not just participants in this resistance movement, but leaders in this resistance movement, and talk about that evolution and how that's become an important piece to the resistance.
Well, that is an issue that I would always like to address, because I think it's phenomenal what this opposition, this organization has been able to accomplish. So, like I always consider myself to be very lucky to be part of the generation that was able to grow up with these values and with these role models in front of me. The Iranian resistance for the past over 3 decades now has been led by women because we see women as the antithesis, women's empowerment, and then women in political leadership as the antithesis to the ruling misogyny in Iran. And this has been part and parcel of our fights against this regime. And this is something that started in the Iranian resistance, specifically in the MEK from 1985, where when they realized that women were making so much sacrifices, they were really shining in every aspect in the fight, but they weren't represented in the highest levels of the organization. And so they decided once they realized that, they decided to change that. So the whole structure of the organization changed to make sure that we could have that, women in leadership. And so Mrs. Mahjabi, who is now the president-elect for the interim government after the fall of the regime of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, she at that time was chosen to co-lead the MEK. And through years of her activities, one of the things that she did was she never stopped at herself because she wanted to show everyone she's not an exception to the rule. It's not like a man's world and then you have one exception or two exceptions or 10 exceptions, that there are strong female leaders. She wanted to show that this is systematic. Women have that potential and they can strive and become that. And so she took every single person's hand one by one and helped them. She helped build them and for them to become, strong leaders. And now we see a whole line of, very capable women in leadership in the resistance, and it spans through the generations, from the generation of the 1979 revolution till our generation and to the next generation that are members of this resistance. And the parliament and exile, for instance, 52% of the members of the NCRI are women, and that I think speaks volumes. And you see women in all throughout the ranks of this resistance. And that has reciprocated its message to Iranian society. Mrs. Rajavi has a motto. She says, "We can and we must." And with that, she has truly been able to, over these years, in her own actions and what she has been able to form, she has really broken a lot of glass ceilings. And she has shown that there isn't anything that women can't do. And in fact, this path of having women in leadership, having women in hegemony, that is really a emancipating force for all of society, men and women, because we're all shackled by these gender roles. So once you break those shackles, there's so much potential in every single human being that will be released. And this isn't just limited to women, it's also in the men, and we see that in our movement. That has had its ripple effect on Iranian society. I think the world, when they saw in 2022 the women of Iran in the protests after the death of Mahsa Amini, they were in awe by the bravery of Iranian women. But to us, it wasn't something new because we've been seeing this whole process in the making for over 30 years now. And I remember back in 1995, Mrs. Bajavi had a speech in London, and she said to Khamenei that you will be overthrown by the same force that you can't even see in your backward misogynist views. And that is exactly what we're seeing on the ground in Iran. And I think that is something that's very inspiring. But also, I think that in fact, that is the only way forward. Just actually this last weekend, we had our International Women's Day conference, and there, I think it was very interesting that Mrs. Rajavi actually touched upon the experience of the Iranian resistance in having women at the forefront of the fight, and the price that they've paid, from those who are currently in prison, like people like Mariam Akbari Monfared, who has spent 16 years in prison right now, but she still serves as like a rock for those who are now being brought to prison, and she helps them and takes them under her own wings and tries to help them, to those who have sacrificed their lives in all of these years. But also, I think Spajavi mentioned that one of the litmus test for a democratic movement in regards to Iran is how their relationship to women empowerment and how they address this issue. And I think that that was something that's very interesting, and it stands out to me because that is truly a litmus test, especially when you're fighting a misogynist regime like the current regime. And especially because Khomeini, from day one, he knew that if he wants to be able to control society, he has to somehow control like half of society completely to be able to have that grip on everything. And that was through the angle of suppressing women. When you've
Yeah,
suppressed half of society, then you have a control over the entire society.
yeah. And as you were speaking, I was wondering about the dangers of women. And step back for a second. The U.S. we have a perceived notion of the gender roles in countries overseas, and whether they're right or wrong. And there's a lot of misconceptions if you watch the news. But with women emerging as leaders in this resistance, I imagine that the dangers of being a part or leading this resistance are the same as the dangers if it was a man who was leading those resistance.
It's probably even more, um, because, like, for instance,
Hmm.
the reality is that Ms. Rajavi has been the number one target of the regime for assassination attempts.
Yeah,
And the regime doesn't hide it at all. Just if you look in the past few years, there have been many attempts against her life and against this movement. Um, the Iranian regime has carried out over 500 terrorist attacks or plots over the years against this resistance. And yeah, so we see that, and that is that risk is always there. And I think
yeah,
that you also see that, like, even for those who come to protest inside of Iran, that young girl who comes to the streets is taking a greater risk than a male counterpart, because if they are arrested and they are imprisoned, I mean, the the torture and the abuse that she's going to face are not even comparable.
yeah.
And everyone knows that in Iran. But they still take that risk and they come to the streets and they're still leading the protest. And I think that that is that phenomenon that will bring about change in Iran.
Dave's Ed Podcast is now part of the Alive Podcast Network, the home of Black voices, where community, culture, and creatives live. Dave's Ed Podcast adds to the vast catalog of titles available on the Alive Podcast Network app on iOS and Android. Check out Dave's Ed Podcast and many others on the Alive Podcast Network app, the home of Black voices.
All right, so that's all for the Q&A section of my interview with my guest, Zolal, excuse me. What I like to do with my guests now is a segment I call First Thoughts. And First Thoughts is an opportunity for me to present a word or a phrase to my guests to get their first thought. Obviously, you're not privy to this because that would ruin the whole notion. So you ready for some first thoughts?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So first thought, which I think is incredibly important to the conversations we've had, is courage. If I say the word courage to you, what's your first thought?
My first thought is, what comes to my mind is all the, brave souls who have sacrificed their lives throughout these years for the notion of freedom and for liberty in Iran. The 120,000 people who've been executed for that reason alone, and the defiance that continues and the resistance and resilience that continues in Iranian society to this day, and maybe like a new culture of courage that we are seeing in Iran.
Okay. So next first thought, and it's along the same lines, just a little bit different, is sacrifice. What's your first thought?
Sacrifice is, I think, one of the most powerful things that exists for mankind. Our movement is, we say at the door, I guess at the top of our organization, there are two values written. One is sacrifice, and the other is honesty. So these are the two principles that our whole fight is based on. And I think that we will only see freedom through self-sacrifice in this path, and that's what gives us that power that is unmatched by any superpower, even or government or whatnot. The fact that the determination of this generation comes from its willingness and to make sacrifices. And I've also learned from Mrs. Rajab, she always says that you can do anything that you put your mind to. You only have to do two things: choose it and pay the price for it. Make that sacrifice that's needed. And making that sacrifice is not something that you could, use as an investment. You have to pay that price every day. It's on a daily basis. Yeah. And I think that's something that's been key in being able to overcome impossible barriers and obstacles that we've had throughout the years. So it's a value that's up on our list, and I think that is what gives you power to move forward.
No, absolutely. That's powerful just for various things that's going on in my life recently, but paying the price to get, where you want or what do you want to do is very paramount. Absolutely. Last first thought, and I when I chose this one, I didn't realize and if you can't tell, I've been listening a lot more than asking questions or talking, just because this conversation is so powerful. And I think when you look at the resilience or resistance, excuse me, and you look at, everything you've talked about, a lot of times these situations, and it's just my opinion, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but the root of this is dignity. And that's such a powerful introverted word, but it means so much more to everyone collectively. And so I shouldn't be talking. I should be giving you this word, by the way. So the last first thought is dignity. What's your first thought?
As you said, it's a very profound word, and it has so many different aspects that you can address it. But I think that is to be able to give all human beings that dignity, to be able to live a dignified life. And that is something that's very valuable, and that's what we strive for. The fact that, these dictatorships, that's exactly what they try to rob people of, and deny them. And so it's very important for us to be able to give that back, and to be able to make sure that we move forward based on that. So for me, myself, like for instance, I think the greatest accomplishment that I could have in my life is to make sure that I live a dignified life, and that I can, at the end of the day, be proud of, the path that I've come, and to know that I've been able to make an impact, not only in my own community, but on society as a whole, or for our future and for our history and for the future generations. And so that is what comes to mind.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So one thing I started last season was something I call TO First Thoughts, and it's nicknamed after my fiance and her nickname. But What the idea is, since I've given you and offered you three first thoughts, that you have an opportunity to throw one back at me if you so desire. So, Zolal, what would your first thought be for me if you had one?
Freedom. There you go.
My first thought, especially because what's going on in the U.S. right now, and I've talked about this in my season premiere episode a couple weeks ago, the ICE situation. It's kind of a mirage. It's kind of being really, really tested right now. Not just in areas such as yourself or other areas around the world, but right here where supposedly freedom is, the gold standard. And so it's a litmus test for not just how this country, the United States, moves forward, but how other potential dictators or regimes see opportunities to oppress. I think when we look at freedom, it's the ultimate thing. You want to be able to choose your own destiny, choose the path of your life, and very simple things such as walking down the street right now in the U.S. could get you in prison, could get you shot and killed. And these things are foreign to us, but as you've talked about, prevalent where you are in Iran, and it's not something we're used to. We're not something we're used to even thinking about. I don't have one right here to show, but I walk around now with a body cam every time I leave my house because you never know what's going to happen, and that's kind of where we are right now in this country, which is a little scary, but a little. I like to talk about ice water in the face moments. That's kind of what we have right now, where someone has thrown a bucket of ice water in our face, and we're seeing the possibilities in the wrong direction that could happen if we let in this country. And so, it's also the reason why we need to support, even if it's not interference or anything like that, but just support the resilience or resistance of people like you. And yeah, that's what I would say about freedom. All right. So that wraps up this interview. And before I let you go, as I always do with my guests, I like to offer you the opportunity. If there's anything you want to talk about or promote, feel free to do so now.
Okay. Well, for those who might be interested, because right now it is a very critical time for our people and our history, and so in the future of Iran. So if you would like to, help become active, there's a lot that you can do on a lot of different fronts. Be it take part in a picket line or a demonstration, or contact your lawmakers, so to do that, if you're in the US, reach out to oiac.org. It's Organization of Iranian American Communities in the US. They have chapters in over 40 states, so you're probably covered. And if you would like to learn more about the resistance itself, visit ncr-iran.org. And to learn more about Maryam Majavi and her role and the path that she has come, she's the president-elect of the Iranian resistance. Visit maryammajavi4change.com. I'll provide you all of those links so you can use them. And yeah, echo the voice of the Iranian people. Contact your lawmakers. Tell them, the people of Iran don't want war or appeasement. They want their rights to resist to be recognized, and to support the Iranian resistance and the people of Iran to create the change they want to see. They don't need to choose between the current regime and the previous one. They want to move forward in the 21st century to a secular democratic republic in Iran. So that would be the message. Please share it. There's a lot of disinformation and misinformation online, so try to inform yourself. And yeah, keep the people of Iran in your prayers and your wishes, and send them positive energy. Hopefully, we will be able to see a free Iran very soon.
Yeah, I hope that as well. And Zola, I want to thank you for stepping into Dave's head. And one thing I started saying to my guests at the end of our interviews last season, I started this, and I think it's not only appropriate for you, but for the people of Iran, is may every today be the best day of your life. I hope that that's true, and I hope that the resistance is successful and peace can come to everyone. So thank you for stepping in Dave's head. My favorite segment of my podcast is My Grin, which stands for Great Reason to Be in Love with Now. I talked a little bit about the nor'easter, snowmageddon, whatever the hell that was, that rolled up the East Coast a couple days ago. And we all hope that, well, the groundhog somehow mysteriously comes up missing. But we hope that, quote unquote, old man winter has blown his last blow, and that this will be the last big one of the year. Because frankly, I got used to seeing my grass for like that 2 days or 2.5 days it was between snow melting and the 1.5 foot, whatever we got of snow. And feel bad for those places northeast of where I'm located who got, the 2 feet, 2.5 feet of snow. Just, it's March almost. Can we be done with the snow already? But one thing that, thinking about old man winter blowing his last one and us moving towards spring, was me thinking about spring cleaning. And spring cleaning for some people may be something that's triggering or something that you just regret. You just don't want to do it because it's cleaning up clutter, or it's something that you've been meaning to do for a year or 2 years, and it's going to be labor intensive and you're just dreading it, all that stuff, right? But I think one of the things that spring cleaning allows you to do is kind of a reset. It's kind of like, when you go through winter and everything melts away and you finally see the grass and you get those little stretches of warm 40s, 50s, 60s days, and you start to see a little budding on plants and trees. And it's kind of like that spring or April, quote unquote, April showers has come in and washed away the winter. We're now ready to start spring. But I think that a couple of things that you can do to make spring cleaning better for you is mentally prepare for it, right? Like I said, some people dread it. Cleaning out closets, cleaning out garages, cleaning out yards, doing whatever. And by the way, doing those things is therapeutic to me in some sense, because especially if you put on music, you open a garage door, a beautiful day outside. Listen, I want to be outside as much as possible. So when we get warm days here, we'll be in the garage cleaning and spring cleaning, all that stuff. But decluttering physical space often surfaces emotional attachment, right? Preparing your mindset beforehand allows you to process memories without being overwhelmed. Whether you consciously are aware of it or not, there are things in your garage or closet or basement or attic, crawl space, all those things. You're aware of some things in there that may be triggering to you, may be emotional to you. And so mentally preparing, hey, I know this picture of my great grandfather, or I know this picture of ex-wife or ex-husband, or I know this is in there. And when I get to cleaning, I'm going to come across this. It's going to make me emotional. And so maybe just preparing for seeing that or touching that. If it's something, a blanket of a old relative or a dog or cat or anything like that, someone important to you, preparing mentally to see or feel or receive those things, or to a more extreme for some people, getting rid of those things goes a long way to making spring cleaning not something that's torturous for you, right? Emotional permission is something else that you can do. It's absolutely normal to feel grief when releasing objects tied to seasons of your life or chapters of your life. Allowing yourself to feel while choosing that growth transforms cleaning into healing, if that's what you still need. Because things may be in your garage because you can't throw them away, or in your attic or crawl space because that's the next step to getting out of the house, but you can't take it yet because you're not healed enough to release those things. And so emotional permission is something else that you can do to prepare for spring cleaning. A spiritual reset. Dave, you're not religious like that. No, but I'm spiritual. I believe in certain things. Spring symbolizes renewal across cultures. I talked about the rains coming and washing away the winter, opening up the bright skies and blue, white clouds and all that stuff for spring. Aligning your environment with your inner intentions creates congruence between your space and your spirit. And so it may be as simple as getting this thing out of your house because of the energy it creates in your house or stores in your house, right? I'm not saying, I'm hoping you don't have like the panty of your ex or lock of her hair or his hair or something. I hope none of you have those things. But it may be, a football from a game that you got injured. It may be a plant from a funeral, a flower from a funeral. For a while, I had a corsage from a funeral of a very, very dear friend of mine for a long time. And it was something I think I actually finally threw away last year or the year before. But I held on to it because of the sentimental nature of it. And it dried up and it became, much smaller than it was when it was fully bloomed and alive. But it was a reminder to me when I saw that of that person, despite the fact that it was, there's pictures of this person as well. And so spiritual reset is something that you can get from spring cleaning. Intentional letting go. It's courageous to release what no longer serves you. And I'm not just talking about in your closet or your garage or your crawl space or attic. It could be people in your life too. And so while cleaning physical clutter mirrors clearing mental narratives that limit forward movement, clearing people out of your life could advance that as well. And so intentionally letting go of things that no longer serve you is very courageous, especially when you put those other things before it. The preparation mentally, the emotional permission, spiritual reset that you can get from this. And then just being intentional about letting things go. I know that I've held on to this diary because it connects me to my ex, boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever. But I've held on to it because every once in a while I want to read and remember those happy times, forgetting about the bad times that led to us not being together anymore. And maybe growth this year is saying, you know what? I need to let this go. Not because I don't want to read the good times anymore, because I don't want to think about this person and let them be an emotional trigger for me anymore. And on that note, forward vision. Instead of focusing on what you're removing or what you're letting go of, focus on what you're making room for. I'm throwing away this journal of my ex, but I'm making room for someone to come into my life or for the person who's in my life to get more, if not all of me. Every clear drawer, every empty box, every piece of dust, if you will, is a vote for the future you want. A future without that journal and memories of your ex. A future without that blanket or that football or that dust and dirt. And so a few other tips. Set clear intention. Identify what you're making space for in this new season. Are you just clearing a wall in your garage or in your attic? Or are you trying to get rid of things that are obsolete? Whether it be memories of people, whether it be technology or tools that are simply not as advanced as things that you can get today and most likely probably cheaper. Is it loose nuts and bolts? Set clear intention. I like this one, right? Create a calming atmosphere before starting, whether it's music, journaling, reflection. Now, music is easy. I love music. Anytime I'm kind of doing something, whether it's around the house, working on the car, cleaning outside, grilling, whatever, I like to be accompanied by music. Journaling is different. And if you're a journaler, you could look back on this day of cleaning garage, attic, whatever, and read that, you know what? Today, I spiritually reset. That was my intention by doing these things and intentionally letting things go. So I like that. Think about what you want to do, how you want to do it, what you want to get from it. And after you're done, think about what you did and what you got from it. Reflect on what you just released and what you now have room for. Process items thoughtfully. Have gratitude for the season or the chapter that they serve. And the example of the journal for the ex, right? You use that prior to rehash the positive and warm, bubbly feeling inside about a person that's no longer in your life. And so as you're throwing that away, it's okay to take a moment emotionally, spiritually, to be thankful for those positive parts that are in that journal that you used to read about and the lessons perhaps that you maybe even learned from you two crossing paths. It's okay It's going in the trash. But it's okay to be thoughtful about throwing it in the trash. Now, if you had a bad experience and you found something about an ex, go on and take that thing like a frisbee and toss it into the trash bag. Listen, that's therapeutic and spiritual too. The physical act of not just gently tossing something to a bag, but skipping it into a box or something like that. And it may sound silly. It may sound petty even, but that's releasing as well. Give yourself permission to pause. If emotion or a physical reaction arises from you cleaning something or getting rid of something or seeing something or feeling something, give yourself permission. It's okay. And again, I'm gonna keep using this example of the journal and the ex. You shared some great times, had some great memories, and maybe had some bad ones too. And the fact that you two are no longer together is probably painful. And seeing this journal or seeing other things that remind you of that person may cause emotion. It's okay. It's okay to be emotional. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to cry. It's okay to all that. It's okay to pause and go outside, get some fresh air for a second, and then come back and resume. Perfectly okay. View renewal as growth, not loss. View reset, spiritual reset, as growth, not a loss. View intentionally letting something go as growth, not loss. And so as you go forward and look at spring cleaning, think about these things, mentally preparing for it. Whether it's as simple as you hate cleaning, period. That's it. That's your only gripe with this. Or if it's more in deep about what you're going to be cleaning and the reasons behind it. Mentally prepare for it. Give yourself emotional permission. It's okay to feel something while you're doing that. Think about this as a spiritual reset, getting rid of things that may be spiritually denigrating you, bringing you down, or spiritually just weighing you down. Intentionally let things go, and that's okay. And of the other tips I gave, probably the one I'll mention here, because it's probably my most favorite of those, is create a calming atmosphere. If you like jazz, play jazz the entire time. If you like, rock, or you like some workout mix type of thing, play that. Make the environment, if you need to drink some beer or have a drink or whatever, smoke something, eat a gummy, whatever. Don't go smoking cigarettes. You have your whole garage or attic smell like cigarettes, and don't smoke cigarettes anyway. But whatever it is, create that environment so that this is not something that's difficult to do because your environment also sucks. If it's freezing cold, do it another day. Like find even down to the temperature it is wherever you're cleaning. That's important. I want to thank Zolal Habibi for stepping into Dave's head. And if you notice during my interview with her, and sometimes I do this depending on the guest, there are times that the story that's told by my guests really hits home and finds a spot within me. And so that's why I allow her to speak and tell her story and tell the story of the Iranian people so much without interrupting. I wanted to get this story out, just like I'm sure she wanted to get this story out. And as I said, at the end, which I say to every guest for the last season in 2 episodes or 1 episode, to hopefully that every today will be the best day of her life. But I really mean that, because nobody should be oppressed. And not to say that, we're in 2026, oppression should be a thing of the past. But we're in 2026, oppression should be a thing of the past. Why are we still oppressing and murdering and raping and trafficking and oppressing people in 2026? Why are we still doing this stuff? That's the internalizing difficulty I have with these conversations, because why are we still doing this today? Why are we still doing a whole array of things? I can run the list and that'd be a whole nother episode. But the story of the Iranian people is troubling. The story of the resistance is inspiring. And so if you want more information, like she said, check out the websites ncr-iran.org or MARYAMRAJAVI4change.com. And check out socials ASHRAFI 4 ever, the number 4 ever, on Instagram and X. I started this number of episodes ago, I believe last season, where at the end of the episode, I'd give you a quote. Before I give you a quote for this episode, I want to just reflect for a moment at an icon, Black history icon, United States icon, a worldwide icon, in Reverend Jesse Jackson, who passed away recently. I remember being, 10, 11, somewhere around there, maybe even before that, where this charismatic, powerful, at least appearing to me. And again, I'm young, so I don't know what powerful is or not powerful, but to me, it seemed like powerful. He seemed like powerful. Black man who is saying things like, I believe he said, down with dope, up with hope. I remember that from my childhood. And so many other things. And I've seen people on social media disparaging, especially in the Black community, some of their perceived or maybe historical facts about Jesse Jackson, Reverend Jesse Jackson. I'm not doing that here. I still remember the scene when President Barack Obama, won the election the first time. And I believe it was in a park in Chicago. And I remember there was a cut to a full screen shot of Jesse Jackson crying. And I never will forget that image. And probably what it meant to him in that moment, where he tried to be in that position that President Barack Obama was in. And it didn't happen. And we can debate the reasons why. But now to sit there and be a live eyewitness to the election of the first Black president in United States history, and to see the emotion on his face, and only imagine what the thoughts, maybe even daydreaming, memories popping and running through his head at that time were. And so Reverend Jesse Jackson passed between episodes. So I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge his life and legacy, his impact on Black and African American members of this community, this country, and as I said, when I realized that he had passed, and I posted, job well done, take your rest. As a people, we thank you for what you did, what you tried to do, and what legacy you left us. And so I leave you with this quote from Reverend Jesse Jackson. At the end of the day, we must go forward with hope and not backward by fear and division. Thinking about what Zolal said, and ironically, I chose that quote before we had the conversation about hope during her interview. But if you think about it, that's the only thing that we can do. And this is the Iranian people. This is the people of the state, or the United States of America. We have to go forward, hope that in this country, the Constitution, as I talked about in my opening, will prevail. That law and order will not just be a campaign slogan to get votes. We can't give in to fear and division, and we won't. So thank you for stepping into Dave's head. Until next time, make sure to get your daily dose of perspective and always be the tone setter in your life. That's all for this episode of Dave's Head. If you enjoyed this episode, I'm sure you'll love similar content in the Alive Podcast Network app. Plus, you can support this podcast and enjoy ad-free listening to nearly 100 other Black-hosted podcasts. Download the iOS or Android app, become a member, and experience unlimited access to Black-hosted content week after week. Follow, like, and or subscribe to this podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and or X at Dave's Head Pod, and on YouTube at Dave's Head Podcast. For more information and links to all things Dave's Head, check out our website at daveshead.card.co. Episode premiere on the second and fourth Fridays of the month. Thanks for tuning in, and remember, enjoy life, because life should be fun. Take care.